Well, there I was thinking that I was in some sort of crazy dream, but then I realised that I just watched some Premier League football last night. 10 goals, 5 stud, 2 red cards, 9 VAR calls in the one half, and Jackson's hat-trick for Chelsea. And Spurs getting a standing ovation coming off after losing 4-1 at home to Chelsea. Let's start to unpack this. I want to cover VAR first. VAR, oh my God. I'm a big, big fan of VAR until probably this season, where I've realised that the technology is sound in most cases. Obviously, there's room for improvement with actually putting cameras on lines and things like that for balls out, like the Sky cameras do, by the way. But there's also a call for more qualified people in the VAR room back at Stockley Park. Over the last few weeks, we've seemed to have a lot of bad VAR calls, and all that's meant is that time just stretches on and on and on. For each VAR decision now, they're going through it with a fine-tooth comb, and a ridiculous amount of stoppage time last night. We had it recently with the Newcastle goal versus Arsenal. Was the ball out of play? Was there a push in the box? Was there an offside? And now VAR are checking multiple things. Last night, there's too many to go through on this video. There's just so many problems and issues with VAR at the minute. And for me, I'd never thought I'd say this, but I think it needs to come out of football and go back to old school, because for me last night, it ruined the flow of what was a phenomenal game. It was one of those games, but it was completely ruined by the length of time the decisions took. So for me last night, it wasn't a game breaker. It wasn't something that I think would change the outcome of the game. I think the Reds were Reds. I think there was some decisions that were a little harsh, but you know, in the end, it seems like it's here to stay. But let's get to the World Cup standard VAR. You know, the ones where the offsides are clearly shown by 2 animations on the last 2 men home and away on the pitch. That's perfect for me. So another pickup from the game I took was I've just watched this twice in a matter of a few days. Nottingham Forest versus Aston Villa at the Forest ground at the weekend. Villa's high line, man. Honestly, all game it was causing them problems. They were defending on the halfway line, and Forest were just playing bad passes through. I mean, they could have been through many, many times. And the same happened again with Chelsea and Spurs. Even with 11 men, Spurs were playing with this ridiculously high line. And I'll come back onto this at the end about sort of tactics and these modern pioneers like Ange and you know, like Emre at Villa that have been, they've got lots of plaudits. You know, I've done video on Ange Postecoglou's amazing setup, but I've got to say this is a bit of a weakness for me. And when you go down to 10 men, you do expect them to naturally drop back a little bit. And when you get them to go to 9 men, you expect them to drop back a little bit more in low block. Ironically, a little bit like Liverpool did against Spurs when Liverpool went down to 9. And they lost in, you know, very late on to an own goal. So to see a 9-man Spurs tackle a 11 strong men Chelsea that had then gone wide with the possession when they went down to 9 men, which is the perfect tactic to do when a team goes down to 9, because they generally sit narrow, or even 10. It was just suicide. They were still in the game at 1-1, and there was still high block, high press, halfway line for the last 4 defenders. And it was embarrassing at times. It was like kids football watching that. So, you know, I've got a lot of respect for Ange Postecoglou. He's an incredible coach, but that one is a bit of a weird one for me. And I think if he continues to do that, then, I mean, that was a blueprint last night, wasn't it? For other teams that are about to play Spurs, that they just need a couple of fast wingers or a fast striker and play the ball through the lines or even over the top. And Spurs were relying on the keeper coming out, sweeper keeping so many times last night, which was, for me, looked ripe for an injury, to be honest. But, Ange said in his post-match that they don't want to change, and even if they'd have gone down to 5 men, he would have carried on. So fair play, but is that a title winning side? I did think they'd got an outside chance this year, but if they're going to stick with that high line, even with 11, they might come unstuck against some sides when they get figured out. The match momentum really, I mean, it was definitely skewed by going down to 9 men, but Spurs did, and if you see from the graph I've put this is the match momentum, and Spurs did open up quite well, but Chelsea did dominate large periods of that, certainly in the second half, and then there's a little bit of a flurry towards the end from Spurs where they could have got goals, to be honest, to be fair, and I thought the disallowed goal was a little bit unlucky from Dyer, but the game did go with XG predictions, so it was 0.89 and like 4.2, I think, for Chelsea, and it was 4-1. So that's pretty close in terms of the game did go as expected. I felt that Chelsea were looked under pressure when it was 1-1 and Spurs were still going at them, which made great entertainment for the neutrals like myself. Not so good if you're a fan of either team. But what a great spectacle of football. And somehow Spurs ended up with 30% possession in the second half with 9 men. I mean, that's just crazy. But in the end, they ran out of steam and Chelsea did what they needed to do. And as you can see from, I'll just flip up a couple of graphics here, from the first and second half to when they made the substitutions, Chelsea, you could see that the substitutions, they changed the formation and the 2 players went out a lot wider. And you can see that from me flipping this table backwards and forwards now, they went a lot wider. And that really did then rip Spurs apart. Jackson, Nicholas Jackson, I'm not a big fan. I think as a backup striker for a club like Chelsea, he's fantastic. I don't think he's a number 1 striker, especially when you've spent so much money in the past few transfer windows. I just do think you should have looked at a more ready-made striker like the Haalands of this world. And, for me, Jackson's like a Højlund at Manchester United. He's a bit of an unpolished stone. He got 3 goals last night. I was going to say great goals last night, but he missed a couple of other chances as well. One where he flew it over the bar from quite close in. He did look as though he was going to trip over when he took on the Spurs keeper. He didn't quite know whether to pass it to Mudryk, who I think was coming offside. But he's one that will develop. It might take a couple of years, but is he a number 1 for me? No. That was only his 5th league goal of the season. And it was against 9 men, and all of them were kind of tap-ins, one-on-ones. Lots of worries of key injuries last night, especially the golden star of Spurs, which is, for me, Maddison. That's going to be a real blow if he's out for any period of time. And obviously, 2 men sent off with their games they're going to miss as well. Instant suspension. So it'd be interesting to see over the next few games how Spurs react. Fair play to Chelsea. They were under a lot of pressure, as Spurs were against Liverpool when Liverpool went down to 9 men, but they did the job pretty effectively, I think. And Pochettino making those substitutions, really, it was only a matter of time. So congrats to Chelsea. They seem to be a little bit more on the way up now. Obviously very happy. But I was very, very impressed with the Spurs crowd at the end that gave them a standing ovation. I've never known a 4-1 defeat at home with 2 sendings off get a standing ovation. But fair play. I think Spurs fans appreciate the brand of football that Ange wants to play. Spurs have been ridiculed a bit in the past for being a bit vanilla. It's certainly not vanilla this year under Ange. It's just like watching school football where everybody jumpers for goalposts and everybody's going for it. So fantastic to see. Just to finish off, great game, loved it. But I do worry about those top managers that are coming through like Postecoglou and Emre as well at Villa, where they do play this high line. It is, for me, tactically, a real easy one to pick apart. Certainly if you've got somebody like Mudryk coming on with the pace that he's got, he's one of the top 10 speed merchants in the country. And I just think it's a risky game. And don't be surprised if either of these clubs now go on a little bit of a bad run because of looking at what happened over the weekend. I mean, the definition of madness is doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome. And that's what I saw in both those games. So thanks for joining me. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon.